Hi, I'm Dr. Mikah Sellers, and welcome to Forces of Change.
And I'm Annie Graziani. I am co-host of Forces of Change. And today we welcome Piyush Mathur. He's co-founder of SkillsBridge AI to Forces of Change. And after building people analytics functions at Nielsen and Johnson Johnson that generated tens of millions in P&L impact, Piyush joins us to share his unique insights on why organizations claim skills development is a strategic priority while failing to structurally invest in it. So welcome, Piyush.
Thanks. Thanks, Vega. Thanks, Annie.
Yeah, so I think we could start with, your career arc really tells a story. You've been at these incredible, large organizations. You've made such powerful impact. We know each other from the Penn CLO program, where you were an advisor in our technology academic block. And I remain impressed by the work that you've done in the past on bridging, ambition with skills and where people really want to go, and aligning that with where organizations want to go. But what I'm interested in is what connects the arc of your career, all these different chapters, to bring you to SkillsBridge AI.
Yeah, I mean, the through line, I would say, is really my passion about unlocking the power of people to the extent that even they can't imagine. And that is how I define leadership. I'll give you a couple of examples. I made bets on people um, very early in their career and also as senior leaders. When they came back to me and said, listen, you are asking me to do this elevated role. I don't think I'm ready for it. And I said, no, I think you are ready for it. I see the potential and I have your back. Let's go for it. And, some of them after 10 to 15 years came back to me and told me actually on LinkedIn saying that, the bet that you took 15 years ago changed the trajectory of my leadership. And I think that to me is the arc that cuts across every single role that I played. I became a managing director when I was 26 years old, and I was asked to run a joint venture company. And that taught me so much about leadership. Just the fact that, you know, getting to P&L is table stakes. What is sweepstakes is how you grow your talent. And when I look back on the two incredible companies that I have worked with. One is a Fortune 50 company, another one's a S&P 500 company. Both were great companies, always focused on their talent. But during that journey, I realized that there were a couple of things that had to be fixed. And I'm talking about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So, obviously a lot of that should have been fixed. And what I call the fixes is like a plumbing problem. The connections are not made. So one is, companies do a really good part of figuring out their strategic business plan, but they don't do a good understanding, or they don't spend enough time on looking at a strategic talent plan and how the two get connected. And I saw that gap happening. The other gap is really the skills that the company needs versus the skill that company has and what employees need to develop. I don't see much of a connection there either. And to top it up, a couple of years ago, we got Gen AI coming in, changing completely the world of work. And I started to imagine in this kind of a world with Gen AI, how these broken connections would look like and what would it mean for the companies. And we came up with SkillsBridge. It's essentially building those connections, building those bridges between what was not connected. And it's been a fascinating journey just trying to connect all these points from a SkillsBridge point of view and help companies evolve. And one analogy we came up with when we were thinking of the bridges, there's this quick story I'll tell you. In Honduras, there is a bridge over Choluteca River. It's called the Choluteca Bridge. It's currently the only standing replica of the Golden Gate Bridge. It was built in 1998. Just a few months later, Hurricane Mitch came and it completely changed the riverbed. Now the river was not flowing over that bridge, but was flowing in another direction. Now that bridge is called the bridge to nowhere. And the analogy that I draw from that is that there is a Gen AI hurricane that's come in already. It's changing the riverbed of skills, and we don't want to become the bridge to nowhere. So this bridge has to be continuously being maintained in a way that as new skills are required, they get developed from employees, and you're always in sync with human intelligence working alongside artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Piyush. I think, look, you just sparked a myriad of questions, right, in my mind as I was thinking about what you were saying. One thing that strikes me when you think about the context of learning and development within the organization, a lot of organizations today, right, are still kind of stuck on what I would call the legacy model, right, in terms of like how they plan strategically, for the market, how they're mapping L&D to that, right, in terms of the skills we need to be competitive. But the reality is the world has changed dramatically, right? And when you think about AI and our ability to adapt to co-piloting with AI, our ability to co-pilot a multi-agent system, regardless of your work function. I would contend, and I'd love your take on this, that most companies are ill prepared to address that for a couple of reasons. One, in order to do it effectively, from my perspective, right, you have to have a very well architected talent graph. That talent graph has to be tied to, you know, all kinds of systems, your project systems, your employee evaluation systems, your chat systems, right? Looking at how people are interacting, both from the development of technical skills, but also power skills and generative skills. So, how will your organization help companies, right, who are many of which are stuck in the last century's model of L&D and forward progression to adapt to this new world?
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. And, the lack of talent graph, the lack of the possibility of hyper personalizing learning content to that individual employee is, I believe, the gap. And before I talk about, how we try to address it, let me just highlight the world we live in and the world in which employees live in today. They are looking at every single platform out there giving them personalized recommendations, whether it's Netflix, Amazon, or Airbnb. They really understand their consumers, and they are telling you what you should be watching next or buying next. On the other side, they look at their company. They are really vested in that company. They spend so many hours in that company, and they are wondering why the company is not able to hyper personalize content to them. And that's a big gap of L&D, right? We go out, we think this problem is a content problem. I think it's a connection problem. So if you look at, if you ask a CEO, why there is a skill gap in the company, he said, oh, we need more training. And then the HR goes and buys 50,000 video library licenses. And then they tell the employees, go, learn at your own pace in your own time. So, the employee is like, give me the 5 videos I need to watch so that you can meet my aspirations. You can put me on the right career track, and I can grow in the company and add value to you. So that's where the gap is. Now, the root cause is exactly what you're saying, that a lot of our information is residing in different siloed systems, and this data is not connected. So what I did before I came into the company is in my ATS. How I am performing in the roles I'm doing is my HRIS. The kind of learning programs I'm doing is in my LMS. What I am coding is in GitHub. What I'm chatting is in Copilot. Like, there are myriads of systems that are not connected. And this is the problem, that is the root cause of where we are. How do I even personalize content for employees when I don't really understand the talent graph. I don't understand that employee at an individual level. How do I personalize? And that's where SkillsBridge comes in. We try to bring all of this data together. We create that profile for that employee. We understand what is required in the Gen AI world in terms of how skills are evolving. We help companies to take some of the tasks, automate them through Gen AI, and the human tasks, we take it to the employees and we try to upskill them with personalized content. So, in a nutshell, that's how we try to address the problem.
Yeah, I had a follow-on question, Andy. I'd love your insight on this as well. One of the challenges I've seen in my work with clients addressing these challenges is one. You're right. The skills graph being connected to that whole plethora of systems in the organization is a huge challenge, right? From a connectivity perspective, it's a challenge because many of them are not necessarily API enabled, right? They're not able to pass the data in the right way. Two, in a lot of those systems, you run into the challenge of yes, sensing is absolute requirement, but at the same time, you run into the challenge of the surveillance state, right? Like, if I'm looking at what somebody's doing in every system, in their communications, in their documents, in their document sharing, in their chats, etc., you start to kind of get into this layer of like surveillance state. And how do you address the privacy issues that are there? The second thing I also noted as a challenge in my experience is a lot of the AI that sits behind many talent graphs today are strictly probabilistic in their assessments. They don't have a layer of determinism, right? That is looking at actual impacts, like work done, actual impacts, and then the corresponding feedback to that, to help more precisely pinpoint what training somebody needs, as opposed to like looking at it from a collective perspective. The probability of somebody who's a front end engineer needs to know these skills because the company is going to be adopting these platforms in the next 6 months. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? And Andy, I'd love you to chime in as well because I'm sure you've seen this in your experience.
Yeah, so I think you have two questions. One is about privacy, and second is how AI is a probabilistic model and how it addresses uh, the issue. So let's talk about privacy. Um, there is so much of text data that can be inferred, which is sitting across different systems. The way to address privacy is to be transparent with your employees as to what data is going to be used. If you're going to use their email data, they better know that the email data and calendar data is going to be used. Otherwise, don't use it. If so there are customers of ours that are saying we don't want to use that data. We don't want to use external LinkedIn data of my employees. Why? Because that was not meant for me. That was meant for the market. So if that is your thinking, don't use that data. But there's still enough merit of using data where the employee is aware that yes, this is data residing in my company's systems and they are connecting it for my benefit. And that story and that narrative has to be told in a very transparent way. I remember at Nielsen, the first time we built an attrition model and all the data we used, there were several countries where we went and announced to the employees that we are going to be using this data to your benefit so that we can grow you. In some companies, it was opt-in, in some companies, it was opt-out. But that's how you handle the privacy issue. And if there are concerns, don't use that data. Use 80% of the data, but you will be able to add so much more value just by connecting 80% of the data, right? So that's one way around, I would say, the privacy piece. The second question that you asked about AI, I mean, it was hallucinating a lot year and a half ago. The AI models are so much better now as we test them out for various scenarios. We make them work one against the other. So if you get an output from one of the LLMs, we get the other one to critique it, to tell us what's not right. There's agentic workflow that's happening, which is working between agents and telling you where it could have gone wrong. So there are things like that which can improve the model, but it's still probabilistic. So I agree with you. So everything we do, we try to get human in the loop before they take a decision out of it. So for example, in our product, we have a jobs library. We start by defining the role and making it contemporary because many times these JDs are outdated. It was made 3 years ago and I still tend to use it. Role has evolved. It doesn't look like anything like 3 years ago. So we revise those JDs, we contemporize those JDs, but then we get the manager, the hiring manager, to approve those JDs that yes, these are exactly the responsibilities or I want to edit it. So once it's finalized, only then it goes live. So there are ways around using the 80 to 90% accurate outcomes that you get from AI by having the human in the loop.
One of the things that occurred to me, and you just hit on it, is as companies are looking at AI adoption and they're looking at the possibilities of what AI can bring to the organization in terms of productivity enhancement, the acceleration of innovation pipelines or go-to-market pipelines. One of the things that occurred to me is what companies are not doing is also mapping strategy to the possibilities of what if. What if I 10x an employee? What if, it used to take 8 hours to do something and now it's going to take 4, and I have 4 hours now of available time. What could that employee be doing? How could they be contributing to the organization in a new and improved and meaningful way? And maybe in the past, there were only if someone was in finance, they were just focused on AP or AR or whatever, like financial function. But now that they're not doing that, how can they be helping in terms of maybe building a BI skill set to look at data and help to infer from AI analysis where a company can find greater operational improvements, or could they facilitate a customer relationship role, helping to build bridges with partners or customers. It just occurs to me that all too often, they're looking at these decisions to adopt AI and how the organization adapts to it through maybe too narrow a lens.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And I would respond with what I'm seeing in two different ways. One is where AI is being used. At Wharton, one of the meetings we talked about AI washing because a lot of companies are doing what happened with advertising about 30 years ago. And I call it spraying and praying. So because the board is asking the CEO, there's Gen AI, they're reading all these articles, productivity. The CEO is going to his C-suite and saying, what are we doing with Gen AI and all of AI, actually, not just Gen AI. And then the C-suite has to do some experiments. So they run to do these experiments without strategically thinking about where it's going to make impact. That's one gap. And I don't know if you read the MIT report, which said 95% of the Gen AI pilots are not giving the ROI that they were expected to give. There is a recent report a couple of months ago. So that's where first gap is. Identify in a strategic manner where you want to go with AI pilots. Yeah, that's one big gap, I would say. Now, you let's assume yes, you have gone with those with the AI pilots and you are figuring out where it makes sense. Then it's all about making sure that your people are ready to work with AI. And that's a lot of change management there. I'm sure you've seen reports, actually our own research that SkillsBridge did. We found 85% of people were using AI in their work, but only a quarter of them told their manager that they were using AI. And that to me is a security issue uh, because you're now using company information in different LLMs. So I think there are multiple areas here which need to be addressed. Um, at SkillsBridge, I mean, one area that we try to address is where you should be using AI. Don't just go blind. Look strategically where you should be doing it. And that's what I was saying, that for my customers, we kind of prioritize where AI agents should be developed, because that will remove some of the repetitive work for employees, unlock some of their time, like you were saying, 10x productivity, and then help them spend more time with customers. I don't know if you read this story. This kind of highlights exactly what we are saying. There was a senior engineer at Microsoft. 70% of his coding time got reduced because of Copilot, because he started to do coding with that. Part of his role was also managing a software engineering team. So of course that part really remained. But this time that got unlocked, he started spending more time with customers, listening to their requests, and then the versions that were being released, which were sometimes took years to release, started getting released in weeks, because he was now understanding their requirement better. He was spending more time with them. Like, that's exactly what we are talking about. Unlock the power of human to do more human things, while AI can do a lot more repetitive things. I mean, I always say, if machines can become better machines, then humans need to become better humans.
Mhm. Piyush, on that note about human potential, we have spoken about apprenticeships and sort of like the younger generations entering the workforce and knowledge transfer across the different generations. We have multiple generations in the workforce right now, and we have a large contingent of our older generation in the workforce retiring, especially during and since COVID. And so, what are we doing to welcome in a skills first kind of economy? As these younger Gen Z really is entering the workforce, how are we welcoming them in and transferring that knowledge to them through things like apprenticeship, not just because they're digital natives and they have all these potentials, right, to kind of deploy that in the workplace, but also they really want to be successful, right? They really want to know how to be successful, and they need access to jobs. So if we're doing skills first and they've got things to learn, how do they learn that so that they can apply their knowledge, their education, but also learn the skills that they need to be successful in the workplace through this like knowledge transfer, necessity that is, we have a very powerful, knowledgeable workforce. It's how do we transfer that, the parts that are applicable, right?
Yeah.
Knowing now that we've got our hands on AI, it's here. So yeah.
Yeah. I,
Mhm.
you're exactly right, Amy. I think we are in the midst of this massive baton handover. In that relay race, you're handing over the baton to the next runner. And sometimes uh, you are at another end and the person is at another end, and you are really not meeting. And I call this, death by death for the desk side chat. So if I go back in my career, early in my career, I learned a whole lot by just listening to my manager talking to a customer, and a difficult customer, and how he was managing that customer. I learned a lot from the person sitting next to me, because I was stuck and I would ask that question and I would learn. I mean, that was natural apprenticeship, right? Just in the moment, probably we can call it accidental, but it happened because we were together. And here comes COVID. Now we are in a more remote and hybrid environment. And that accidental apprenticeship is kind of going away or diminishing. Let me put it that way. Sometimes when you're hybrid, some part of your team comes, some part of the team doesn't come. Like, I mean, it's all kinds of things that we have seen now in the workplace. So handing this baton over is absolutely critical. And it should be made by intentional design rather than it being accident, because now that those accidents are not working. So it has to be done through that design. And you're right. I mean, 76 million baby boomers are going to retire in the US workforce. Imagine the institutional knowledge and wisdom that's going out the door of your company's premises. You can learn how to develop a marketing plan through AI, but you can't learn the office politics. You can't learn why the VP of finance hates the word disruption. Those things you will learn through experience sitting with that expert, with that institutional knowledge. And I think it's broken right now as we speak. And we have to make sure that the baton is passed on seamlessly if the company has to win the race.
I have a kind of side project I'm doing right now, called the Readiness Gap. It's a research study into the gap that exists between higher education and the marketplace needs. So, if you're going to school for, marketing or finance or comp sci or whatever it is, now you're entering into the workforce that is, AI driven. The curriculum that we have in higher ed at the baccalaureate level, and many times at the graduate level, and sometimes at the PhD level or the doctoral level, is still, years and years behind where the market is today. So when you have, all these new, fresh minds coming into the organization, and they have no work history, right? They have no past record to go on. You know, I think the AI can be really instrumental in the early stages of bridging the gap between the skills the organization needs them to develop and the skills they're actually coming in with, maybe through a series of baseline tests, right? In terms of the job expectations and how that is changed in the age of AI. Is that your thoughts, yeah?
Absolutely. And I will term it differently. I talk about AI being the creator of this chaos with the disruption. It can also be the calm of creating the calm of this chaos. So really calming things down in the job market, because it can be your friend in learning. It can tell you exactly as you come into the workforce what are the learning content that you should go through as you are entering the workforce. You are exactly right. And I've actually done some keynote speeches on this topic about youth development in the era of Gen AI, where you can see today, I mean, the unemployment rate among recent graduates is the highest it has been in 45 years. So imagine where we are in that journey because of this gap. And let's make it more complex. AI is also trying to take away a lot of the jobs at the entry level, because a lot of what you do initially in the first year when you enter the workforce are the kind of jobs that are getting automated. And that's why there's reduction in hiring. And that's why these people are getting underemployed. So on one side, there's high unemployment rate. There's a whole lot that's underemployed. And that I think I worry a lot about. How do we prepare colleges to have talent that's ready to enter the workforce? I think there's a gap that needs to be resolved there. There has to be some incentive for organizations to be hiring youth in their company, because imagine what happens 4 years from now. You'll have no managers. Where is the succession? Right? So there's a whole, complex web of issues here that needs to be addressed.
Payush, we ask all of our guests a couple of questions. And the first one here, this might be a good point to ask this question, is relative to the forces of change that society is facing right now, and maybe it has something to do exactly with what you were just saying, but I'm curious about your perspective here. What are the 4 forces driving transformation that you think leaders, policymakers, and citizens should be paying attention to?
Yeah. I'll go quickly. And this is forces of change in the context of future of work, right? So obviously there are different forces of change as you go more macro, but I'm looking at the future of work and what are those forces that we see that are going to change things. The first one I think we already talked about is the generational handover. We have to make sure that this is intentional. We have to make sure they are connected and the baton is passed on seamlessly if you have to win the race. The second one I would say is AI on steroids. I think the way AI is entering the workforce, you will see a lot of opportunity for 10xing the productivity. You'll see a lot of opportunity of unlocking the time for people to do more human things and human centric uh, or developing human centric skills like empathy and all of that will become very, very important. I think it's kind of under indexed right now. The third force I see, which is very interesting, and it's kind of linked with um, the generations retiring, but it's also linked with what's happening with immigration. It's a little bit linked with geopolitics. If you combine all of that, I think there'll be talent shortages. And that to me is one that will really wake companies up. You'll not be able to deliver revenue if you don't have the skills you need in the company and you don't have the talent, and there's a serious shortage. So, less people are being born, less people are moving across destinations or across different countries because of immigration. And then more people are retiring and leaving the workforce. Put all of that together. That's a major force that needs to be addressed. The fourth one that I see in some way that can actually help with these three other forces at work is people plus AI collaboration. I think there's a new worker coming in that can do certain set of tasks. If you learn to work with that worker and you enable this collaboration in a way that it's a win-win for the enterprise and for the employees, you can't do one without the other. So you have to think of that win-win scenario. Then you can address the generational handover, you can address the talent shortages, you would have leveraged Gen AI technology to your advantage. So I guess these are the four that I see that are happening currently.
I agree with all those. And one of the things that, that occurred to me as you're mentioning, some of the challenges, of not bringing in, whether it's younger workers or more diverse workers, is it's the chicken and the egg, right? And when you think about, the age of AI and how organizations, are going to be working with AI, the way that AI learns, if we don't have diverse organizations, both in terms of, the disparity of age gap, but also the disparity, across a myriad of other dimensions, right? Companies are going to suffer. Your ability to win in the market will suffer. Your ability to innovate will suffer. Um, I think it's really fundamental, right, to organizations being able to embrace and adopt AI and to do it successfully. To also think about all those other considerations that you just mentioned. But we could probably have a whole nother episode on all of that. Another question that we ask our guests is, when you think about the last year or two, what is a book that you've recently read within the last year or two that you think is really instrumental, when it's applied to those forces of change, or perhaps other forces of change that you think are really important that we need to address, and why?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of interesting content out there, a lot of books. The one I pick would be The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleiman. And then the reason I picked up that book was because I think a lot of leaders are still thinking about Gen AI like a new form of a better Excel. They're not realizing the power that it will unlock. They're getting to terms with it, but I think they're still not there. And I think this book really highlights the, the technology and the change it will bring and how humans need to get developed. The old ways of doing it will get washed away. So you got to really think of how we need to expedite and completely change the way we develop humans. There is one particular insight that I really liked. He calls it the containment problem. Says that many times we believe that we can contain the impact of AI or disruption of AI by doing a regulatory policy, by buying some software license. But this is much bigger than that. The only way he thinks that you can contain the disruption of AI is by accelerating the human side of AI, of the equation. So how do we quickly develop people so that they can work well with AI is probably the only way you can contain this problem, is his view. And I may not be there all the way, but I like the fact that we have to really start to see how do we upskill humans in this era, as Gen AI gets better and better.
Absolutely. And fantastic book. I really loved it. I thought you probably could have named it the coming tsunami because it outpaces any wave of change we've seen in human history in terms of the potential effects and also the potential catalyst, right, for human advancement. So look, thank you so much, Payush, for your time today. Really, really grateful for you taking the opportunity to have this conversation with us. Really appreciated your insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Payush. And how can people follow you and follow along with SkillsBridge?
I mean, we have SkillsBridge AI. You can go to our site. I'm on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn and reach out to me. I'm pretty active there. Yeah, that's me. That's how you can reach me.
Terrific.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Payush. Thank you for listening to Forces of Change. If you found this conversation valuable, follow us at forcesofchange.fm and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep questioning and learning about the forces of change among us.